All right, and we are live, it says. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our September listening club. I don't know why I forgot to change the word here. It's not August. I kind of always forget September exists, so just ignore that part. It's September listening club. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This is one of 3 media clubs that we have at the Dragonfly Arts Collective. We also have a movie club, which we will be having our discussion on Monday night. And we also have a book club that meets quarterly, and we will be meeting next month. So I announced these picks in our Facebook group, which I will go ahead and put up on the screen. I announce them on the 1st of every month, so I will be announcing this on Tuesday. Yeah. Our new picks will be up on Tuesday. And if you join our Facebook group, we don't just do the media clubs there. We also have a lot of other meetings. It's a group of creatives. So we give it a platform for people to talk about the problems they're having in the creative industries or promote themselves there. We also have weekly calls about creative problems, as well as live meetups in the Los Angeles area, because Beckett and I are Los Angeles based. But we do welcome people to our calls through Zoom from all over the world. So you can find us there, and it's a really great community. You can also use that group to make suggestions on movies or music or books that you think that we should talk about. We also have a Patreon. Right now, everything that we offer is open to the public through our Facebook group. But we are working on getting some perks up there so that you can have some benefits. But it's really just a way to support us if you enjoy what we do and you'd like to support, especially our in-person meetings, which it costs so much money to just exist these days. You can support us for as little as $2 a month. But like I said, everything that we offer is currently open to the public in our Facebook group. So you can absolutely join us there.
Yeah, so far everything is free, even though it's not free to us, it's free to you.
Yeah. So that's how you can join us. We only allow a small amount of people on these calls because I can't really manage having a lot of voices in a discussion all at once. But I can handle a lot of people having a lot of thoughts. So we wanted to make sure that this was done through both our Facebook page as well as YouTube. So anybody who wants to join the discussion can join us live. If you comment and we are rolling, then we can actually see those comments live and respond to you. If you're watching it on the replay, you can still comment, and it will actually tell us what time you're commenting at. So I can figure out what it is that we're discussing at that time. And I started these clubs because I love talking about media. So I am always down to talk about this pick or any of our past picks. And speaking of our pick, we are talking about Taylor Swift today, which is a topic that I picked because specifically Tim keeps talking about Taylor Swift and how much you dislike her.
I have not said that I dislike her. That's not
You
true.
have implied it heavily.
No, I have not. I think she's a wonderful human being.
I'm sorry, you don't dislike her. You dislike.
I recommended this album.
Did you?
Yes, a couple months back we were talking about, I don't know, maybe it was Billie Eilish or something, and I brought Taylor Swift up, and I mentioned that this was actually the only album that I connected with in any way.
I don't remember that discussion. I actually picked this album because I asked a bunch of Swifties what album we should discuss. And everybody said this album, and it was very clear that it wasn't exactly everybody's favorite album, but they thought this was the album that everybody should discuss of hers.
Interesting.
And it is. I actually really wanted to this month explore like her entire discography because she is somebody who everybody says she has eras. Like all of her albums are kind of different from the last one. Like you really, she grew up in the entertainment industry and you can really see it in her music as she goes along. And I really wanted to listen to it from start to finish, at least her re-recordings. And this month got away from me. I have had a lot on my plate. So I didn't get around to doing that. But I did listen to this album twice. So I'm guessing based on that comment there, Tim, that you have listened to this album before. Beckett, had you listened to this album before?
No.
No, that's not the right. I'm going to be floundering around a bit because
And
all of these are big blocks.
I was very overwhelmed by just how much Taylor Swift music there is. There's a lot. So like endeavoring to go through her discography is quite a feat. And I must admit that I was not in the mindset to be, because I just went to a Green Day concert. So all I've been listening to is Green Day for months. So
there's definitely like a certain spot that like I can see what mood I'm in if I go to like my Spotify like songs and play them in order. Like you can see like the my moods going up and down. Yeah, I can definitely see that. A lot of her music though is like different versions of it, as well as she re-recorded all of her stuff. So I have a list of her discography on one of these slides if you'll bear with me for a split second as I go through things. There they are. So yeah, she re-recorded her earlier albums due to a ownership rights. I forget his name, but there's one guy that like owns all of her masters, and so she doesn't get the money for those, and so she re-recorded them, and so that she has the rights to the masters.
Right, I feel like I heard about that.
It's very common for like it's a very common story with pop artists, especially. There's quite a few of them. One of my favorite things about Katy Perry is she broke into a record studio to steal her masters.
Awesome.
Because they refused to release it, but they still owned it. So yeah, she does have a lot of stuff. She seems to release pretty regularly every 2 years. But going back to my album list, if I can ever find it again.
I thought that was your album list.
Not my album list, my track list.
So Tim, had you listened to this album before?
Yeah, I probably listened to it about, I want to say, well, I've listened to it 3 times over the last 4 weeks, most recently today. And then I want to say I've maybe listened to it maybe 9 or 10 times over the past year.
You listen to a lot more music than I do, like just like consistently.
Well, you know, I made a concerted effort with this one because I wanted to understand what this thing is, what this Taylor Swift phenomenon was. And so, and I don't know who I heard about this album, or maybe I was just reading through All Music, and this seemed like the right album to be the one to really approach. I think I went through a couple of her older, just individual tracks, and nothing really connected for me. But what's so interesting, I want to like this album more than I do. And I think if I work with it, I can get there. It's just that I accept the fact that I am not her audience. She is not writing music for me. And I think that's part of my disconnect. The way the song form she uses, how she writes, when she bothers to write chorus, verse, chorus, when she bothers to do that, I can't tell. I have no sense of form with her music. And I can't, as many times as I've listened to this album, I can't recite a single lyric for you, and I can't hum a single melody. But I can put this album on, and I can have it on in the background, and it doesn't annoy me. It's pleasant to listen to, and I don't mean that as a backhanded compliment at all. Which is why I think that I can get to a place where, you know, I could really enjoy this album. But right now I'm in this very weird place where I think there's something there, but I can't quite grasp it yet.
If only you had 10 more times of listening to it.
Yeah, I can definitely see the appeal. I think if I had discovered her, when I was a bit younger, a bit more broken up, I would have related more to her music. It's never been like I'm more of a Lana Del Rey type than Taylor Swift.
I've just come to the conclusion that I will never understand any cultural phenomena or how it happens. I think that is an entire subject of study that needs to go on. I mean, you also have the same thing happened to Taylor Swift as like the same thing that happened to like Harry Potter. Like it just hit at the exact right time for a generation. And I don't know if there's really like a science behind it. It's just a strange phenomena that happens occasionally. And Taylor Swift is interesting because it kind of happened later on. But this album is interesting to me because she kind of wrote it behind the scenes. This album was, she came out with Lover like the fall before and was supposed to go on tour, and the tour got canceled because of COVID. And she just wrote this entire album along with like a couple of people that she was just like, everybody was quarantined. They were just sending bits and pieces to one another. And she released it without telling her record label. So this is Taylor Swift, but without having to deal with her record label or anybody else going around her. This is her doing experimental. This is her dealing with the start of COVID. I think this was released in, I could look it up. I think it was released in either July or August of, let's find out, July of 2020. And it was recorded all in 2020 because her tour got canceled. And this is, I think, bits and pieces of songs that were already in the works for her. But it was, my understanding is Aaron Dessner and Jack Antonoff would send her like beats or like bits of instrumentals, and she would just write the top line and send it back to them. And it was just back and forth a couple of times for like 3 months. So this album is fascinating to me because she writes pop hits, and she's very clearly a commercial songwriter, which is completely fine. And this album is the exact opposite of that. But anyways, I'm going to go ask the question that I was going to ask before this tangent started. What's your favorite song on the album?
7.
Tim?
I can't say that I have a favorite song. There were 2 songs that caught my ear. One of them was The One, and I think that's just because it was the first song on the album. The other one that made me stop what I was doing and pay attention was My Tears Ricochet.
All right. This album is, every single one is, it has like a story behind it.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was like, each song on the album is like its own little story, which was interesting to listen to.
Well,
very relatable.
I always have the thing of, if an album isn't named after any of the songs on the album, then you have to explore the album title deeper as to what the album means. And the title of the album is Folklore. And I think, granted, I said that I didn't listen to all of her discography in order like I wanted to. Because when you have a discussion about this, it's hard to like not just talk about Taylor Swift as a phenomenon. And I'm not super familiar with her work outside of singles. So I'm a little bit upset that I didn't get to listen to all of it. But I think this is the first album where she's not writing autobiographically.
Really?
Yeah. I think she is well known for writing autobiographically. She writes about her life. It is like something that I think has added to the phenomena of Taylor Swift. I mean, she famously writes about every single breakup she's ever been through. And this was the first album where she didn't do that. So I think The Lakes is based on personal experience. And I think outside of that, it is all stories that she made up because at the start of COVID, she said she was listening to albums, she was watching movies, she was reading books, and she wanted to write stories. And so this is folklore.
I find that surprising because the lyrics are so, they seem personal, at least from like without knowing anything about the process.
Did you happen to read up anything on this album?
Nope.
So I didn't catch any of this, but yeah, so they are all stories that she has made up in some way, shape, or form. Some of them have like a little bit of personal. I think she said My Tears Ricochet is more about her relationship with her record label. So I think they are a little bit, but the one that I thought was interesting, and I remember listening to this when I was listening to the album, of the song Betty kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I mean, it comes after Epiphany, which is also very strange in terms of point of view. But Betty is interesting because it's from the point of view of a guy named James who cheated on Betty and is trying to get back with her and is apologizing to her. But when I was reading up on it, it turns out that that entire story is Cardigan is Betty. August is the girl that James cheated on Betty with. And then Betty is James trying to get back. Like, they're related. They are all the same story.
Huh.
And I didn't get that when I was listening to it. But there is an interesting connection. When I found out, I went back and listened to them again. And there are line similarities between Cardigan and Betty that point to each other. In Cardigan, she says, I'll be back. I'll see you again. You'll be back on my porch step begging for forgiveness. And Betty is literally him being on the porch step begging for forgiveness. But there's other things. The Last Great American Dynasty is based on the house that she owns in Rhode Island. I think Epiphany is based on stories her grandfather told her. So it's a really interesting album. It's her exploring, telling things from another point of view.
So how is her writing process? Have you read anything about that? Like, does she just do the lyrics, or?
My understanding from, and I'm going to say everything on this is based on me reading basic things. I am not an expert on her, and I haven't dug deep enough to be like, yes, I know things. But my understanding is that either Jack Antonoff or Aaron Dessner wrote melodic line, or not melodic lines. They wrote instrumental parts. Some of them are for instrumental works that they were already working on. And Taylor Swift wrote the top line. And some of them are that she started and then they added on to it. So it was a lot of back and forth. And I know Bon Iver wrote his own lyrics for Exile. Tim?
I now realize that I'm actually more familiar with Taylor Swift than I said, because I'd forgotten that there was this wonderful documentary about her on Netflix. And if you're interested in her process, that goes into that a lot. And I didn't know much about her when I watched it, and I think I had heard. Everybody heard the talk about how she writes about her breakup. So I think everybody in America and throughout the world knows about that. But as she started doing things on a personal level, the stories about how, when she goes into a city, how she treats the people there and how she treats her crew, I really want to get a better sense of her. And this documentary about her, and I can't remember the title of it. I know it was on Netflix when I watched it, but I came away from it even more interested in who she was. And I think that was when I started looking around for, what albums I might listen to get a sense of her, to get a better sense of her. I do remember she did a lot of, I know when she was growing up, she did the music and the lyrics for the songs she was writing when she was a teenager. She knows how to play piano, and she did a lot of writing that way. And then they go into how, I think it was Jack and whoever she's been writing for the longest time with, they go into how, that relationship started and how they write songs together. But yeah, if you're curious about her process, I think that documentary is a great way to go.
I'll definitely have to check it out because, like I said, despite picking this with the full intention of spending my month pretty much studying Taylor Swift, I failed at doing that. I definitely want to learn more about her and her process. And I think this was definitely a turning point for her of just like her ability of storytelling.
Yeah.
Or more of a release, maybe.
Again, having not listened to really anything, any of the albums, hearing just, I have no sense of, what this thing is in a bigger perspective.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Despite the fact that I think this is like very different from what she usually does, there's a lot of like Taylor Swiftisms I recognize in her, not lyric writing, but in her vocal patterns. So it's not an entire disconnect from her. It definitely still sounds like her.
One thing that occurs to me is that listening to this, I would never ever know that she was ever a country artist.
Yeah.
You would never know that the woman who wrote this album came out of country music.
I actually really appreciate the fact that she goes through eras of just like this self-growth that's happening that you get to be along for. She doesn't like get put in a box. Yeah, so you guys didn't know about this album coming out at just midnight after she released it. Like because I remember, this is what I remember about this album of she like made a social media post like 8 hours beforehand saying, I'm releasing an album at midnight. And like everybody, including her record label, was like, excuse me? And it kind of started a thing where I think she did this one first. And then I think the surprise albums kept coming from like big artists. And I don't know if that was like something that record producers were like, oh, we should really get in on this trend. Or if it was artists being like, wait, I can do that. You can just release an album. Search.
I mean, that would make sense because I know that the artists have been fighting with the labels and the streamers and all that stuff recently.
Okay, so Beyonce's did come first. Beyonce did do it first. But I guess the very first person who did it was David Bowie.
Which album was that?
So he wanted to release his studio album Toy this way, and it was ultimately shelved. But so it didn't happen, but he brought it up. Radiohead released In Rainbows as a surprise album in 2007. That was with a 10-day announcement. So they announced it 10 days before it was released.
They also did one, I think, which was like pay whatever you want.
Yeah, that was In Rainbows. Yeah, okay. That's the same one. I remember that. 9 Inch Nails did a couple of them that they released independently from their record label. They were released for free. So Kanye West used to give false release dates so that it would preempt leaks. So he would give a release date and then release it sooner because people kept leaking his album. That inspired people. So I guess it's been a thing for a while. But it seems like it was like a pretty standard thing of like them releasing independently of their record labels. And I wonder what her record label would have said to this album, because it was recorded in such it was written and recorded in such a short period of time that I feel like it never got to them. And you're right, there's no hooks in it. And I feel like their record label would be like, but what are people going to sing?
I did know, like, it was surprising going through and recognizing bits and pieces of it that I guess I've just heard out and about. That I didn't realize.
It does have a couple of singles: Cardigan, Exile, and Betty, which Betty is a surprise for me.
I mean, I feel like the most recognizable one for me was Exile.
Same. I played that a lot in the Ariel studio when I was still going to the Concord. I have a bunch of stuff on here. And like I said, I'm like, despite the fact that this was a release with like so few people like as writer and producers as compared to our normal things, the list of personnel on it is insane. Also, I appreciate Joe Alwyn getting credit, who was her boyfriend at the time. And I think was just quarantined with her, so he helped out. Just keeps going.
Wow. Yeah.
So for a surprise release, a very large amount of personnel on it.
Yeah, but when you think about how this music gets recorded today, you know, you're not dragging a whole band into a studio to record. I'll bet most of these people just played their parts in isolation, and you know, whoever was producing the track threw it all together.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have had to.
Yeah, especially at the height of COVID. Yeah, for sure.
So, and I think that may be a part of why I have such a hard time connecting with the music of the album. I don't know that I consciously, if I hadn't looked at the cast of players in it, that I knew consciously that this was edited together and not really performed. But I think that's why. I think I can hear that. I think I have those kinds of ears for that kind of thing that, you know, takes me out of that music. And I think that's one of the reasons I prefer the tracks with her that are very sparse, where it's her voice and maybe a synth or one other instrument or something, where it's where I don't get all the artificialness from it. Because she has a beautiful voice. You know, I would go to see her sit down on a stool on a stage with a guitar and hear her do that kind of thing. I would totally go see her for that.
I think that the track listing on this is just impressive because honestly, when I'm listening to it, I don't recognize this many instruments on it. It's a very minimalist album.
Yeah, there were a couple songs where, like, because I was listening to it while I was driving around my appointments today, and a couple of songs where the instrumentation is so subtle that I was like, is that coming from outside? Is that my car making that noise? What is that? But it was the music.
I want to know more about the modular synth used.
You know, but I mean, just because somebody has a credit on here, you know, so-and-so played saxophone, it might be they turned in the whole track worth of music, and then the producer took like 5 seconds of what they played and pasted it into a track and then just repeated it several times, and that's all you get, or didn't repeat it at all. And that's, you know, that's why you probably have all these people, and it still seems like you don't hear any people playing on it, or you don't hear a lot of people playing on it.
I used to have to explain to people because I went to music school and I had to do music business classes of like the reason why there's so many songwriters listed on a thing is because the royalties are different for writing versus performing versus production. And people try to get on as many of those planes as possible. And so a lot of people that are listed as the songwriters weren't songwriters. They just want the songwriting royalties. And as a part of their contract, they get that. And so when I see something large like this, I'm like, there was a contract. They played a part. It didn't make it on this album, but they still get the credit for it.
It's kind of like being an associate producer or an executive producer on a film.
Yeah. But when you see like this album doesn't have it, but I imagine there are other Taylor Swift albums that have like the writers are like 7 lines long. Beyonce has it on all of her albums. That doesn't mean that they were like all sitting at a round table in a room. It just means that somebody wanted that royalty. And as a part of their contract, they get that royalty. A lot of times the owner of the record studio gets some of that, and sometimes the people that are doing the recording engineering get that credit so that they can get the royalty lines. That doesn't happen here, but I just thought about that when I see how much personnel is on this for a thing that doesn't have a lot of people on it.
Sure, but if you look at the tracks again, you see that the writers, there's really, for the most part, only the 3 of them.
Yeah, for this one,
it's Swift and one other person.
Yeah, it's just them sending the tracks back and forth to each other. So I imagine all of these people were hired by either Aaron Dessner or Jack Antonoff as like the people writing it. And then the other person on there, William Bowery, is actually Joe Alwyn, who is her boyfriend at the time, who was spitballing things with her. And then Justin Vernon is Bon Iver. So he wrote his own parts on it. So yeah, it's really just her and one other person. But I am curious about the writing lines on all the rest of the albums that she has and how many people get listed on it. I also know that she made her own studio in her house for this. So if I go back to this, she named it Kitty Committee. And I think all the rest of them are the places where the people that she was writing with were recording. She recorded everything in Kitty Committee, which is the studio that she built in her house for COVID. I wish I came out of COVID with something as good as this.
Don't we all?
Instead, I just got anxiety.
I look at that track list and I think about my reaction to the album as a whole, and I'm fairly certain that a producer in the 70s would have had them cut this down to 10 tracks.
Yeah, this is an hour long.
Yeah. Yeah, the standard length was generally 40 minutes back in the 70s for a single album.
That's short.
Yeah. Well, it seems short today. Back then, Van Halen took a lot of shit because most of their albums were just barely over 30 minutes long. But yeah, the standard was about 40 minutes. And that's as much practical because of how much music you could put on an LP, on a piece of vinyl.
Yeah.
I generally think of albums as being between 30 and 40. If it's something less than that, I start to be like, is this this is short? And then anything above that, I'm like, this is long. So 30 to 40 minutes is usually where I think an album should be at.
Yeah, generally when you get down below 30, like you get 20 minutes, it's an EP. Uh-oh.
Oh, emergency.
There's
Earthquake?
an alert. Oh no, we're all gonna die. Missing endangered adult.
Oh, okay, good.
It's a silver alert. I didn't know they had those.
I think
Yeah,
it's a new thing.
I haven't gotten one in a really long time. The only alerts I've gotten recently were for earthquakes. So when I heard yours going off, I was like, earthquake.
Yeah.
The last time we had
we had an earthquake a little while back, like a few. Did you guys feel that where you are, Rebecca?
I mean, I've felt 2 recently. One time, well, Ryan keeps getting alerts on his phone before they happen. I got one on my phone about 30 seconds after it happened, which wasn't
That was
very
the
useful to
thing
me.
yeah, I was like, oh, and the cats picked it up before anything happened. They were like looking around the room. I was like, what's going on? And then there was an earthquake. And then my phone was like, earthquake, duck and cover. And I was like, yeah,
It
it's
already
already
happened.
yeah.
I knew it because I've been propagating a lot of my plants. So my desk is full of glass.
Ah.
And that earthquake shook so much at the beginning of it that all of the glass like clattered a little bit, and like it was probably the second scared I've been in an earthquake when it started. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I had one that was like I was directly on top of the epicenter, and I did not realize that you could hear earthquakes.
Mhm.
And the weird thing is both of those were like only like a 4.0. Like they were both pretty small earthquakes. But like,
I mean, I remember Northridge. That was scary. And I didn't live anywhere near Northridge.
I did. Be glad you didn't. The last one that we had, I didn't get alert till about a minute or two afterwards. I didn't feel it. I heard it. All of a sudden I heard stuff rattling in the house. I'm like, fuck. And then I realized that it must have been an earthquake. And then the alert came along, and that's, that confirmed as earthquake. But I didn't know it was an earthquake. I just thought I thought mice or something.
yeah. Fun living in Los Angeles. But back to the album. Her writing list is actually pretty short on all of her albums, so I will give her a lot of credit for that. Let's see what other slides I have made.
I think a lot of that is because so many of the artists that say hit the Spotify charts are not really songwriters. They're kind of creations of producers who put pretty people, give pretty people some words to sing, and they do that. And Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish, those cats have been writing songs since they were teenagers. So we're talking about the difference between a real songwriter and a creation.
Yeah. I am very curious, and I'm going to look this up now because by the time that we hit like 30 minutes on these calls, it's just me Googling things that I find interesting. So I've brought up the year-end ratings for Folklore, so the spot that it ended up on best albums. And it's in the top 10 for all of them except for Pitchfork's. Which made me question, what is Pitchfork's best album of the year?
And
it was Fiona Apple. Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
So they're kind of stuck in the past.
It was an interesting album. I mean, their number 5 is Perfume Genius, 4 is Phoebe Bridgers. So it's not like I just thought it was really weird that like Pitchfork was like 29.
Yeah, best album of 2020, Fiona Apple?
Yeah. She released an album.
Oh, did she? Oh, I didn't know.
It's called Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
I'm fascinated that Rolling Stone put her at number 1 because they hate everybody, or back in the day they hated everybody.
Yeah, it's kind of turned into, there's so much to talk about with Taylor Swift, and yet somehow this has turned into me being like, wait, what does Pitchfork think the best album of the year is?
Well, when you're talking about Taylor Swift, you're talking about something that has I talk about her like a thing. I'm not talking about Taylor Swift the person, but Taylor Swift the industry. Yeah. She's an industry, and
she's a company.
How many musical artists are people wondering who they're going to endorse for president?
So, by the way, Rolling Stone's number 2 is Fiona Apple's Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Which was an album that I wasn't actually a huge fan of.
I didn't even know she was still making music. Exactly.
So that's where it stands at. Yeah, I guess Pitchfork just hated her. We have to put this on the list still.
Somebody had a vendetta.
Because if this album came out in the 70s, Rolling Stone wouldn't even made their best albums list. Because they hated pop artists like her.
I mean, so looking over the Rolling Stones 50 best albums of 2020, they also have Run the Jewels, which is a rap duo, as well as like a lot of other pop artists and like interesting things that are on there. So they went to tons of different genres.
Yeah, I think since Jan Wenner, since he left the company, they've actually become more interested in general pop music and pop trends than they were back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s during their heyday.
So far, where she hasn't ranked number one, it has been Fiona Apple. Just so you know. I think that's interesting. But I remember not
I was
liking it.
I was never a big fan. Back in like 90s, early aughts, I've always been a rock and roll girl. So.
This actually begs a very specific question of, very clearly we have Fiona Apple, who came out with an album after a very long hiatus, becoming number one on a lot of these lists, versus Taylor Swift, who released a surprise album in 2020. I think she released 2 albums in 2020. I might be wrong on that. I think she released 2 albums. It was Folklore and then Evermore. Yeah, Evermore was also 2020. So like, what are the rankings for? It just might be a commodity thing. So are they really something that's understandable, or who's making the decision here?
Well, I think with a lot of them, particularly Rolling Stone, it's how the reviewers on their music review team in general. It's kind of they take all what the reviewers think and assign points or whatever, and that's how they assemble their list. So
Okay.
but they Billboard probably the same, although Billboard might be a chart thing. Entertainment Weekly has a number of music critics as well. So, but I imagine like the Guardian, the Independent, the LA Times, they just, I don't know how they pick them.
But yeah, also if you're basing it on a bunch of reviewers, I guess my question is it based on musical integrity? Is it based on just the fact that it was one album after a very long hiatus and another one that was meant as a surprise and to the record label as well, like a way to circumvent the record label during a time of just insanity?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting thing to think about, because like, what do like rankings like this even mean in today's music industry? Like, where you can find anything you want streaming anywhere. Like, what does it mean to an artist to make it onto a top rank list?
I am convinced that the most exciting musical artists are like among like the people, like the anonymous people that you will never hear from. Like, it is a business in and of itself. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, because this is a COVID release, despite the list of personnel that I was surprised to find on the instrumentals, she actually did all the art design and like art direction herself.
I love this cover.
Yeah, it's a great cover. This is a close-up of it, but like, I mean, the thing is much larger. It makes you feel tiny. It's also her first album that has a parental advisory, which really shows, I think, that it's not her standard business model.
Yeah, it really kind of captures the weight of the time that it was released in.
I want to know where she was.
Yeah. Somewhere foggy.
With tall trees.
Yeah.
Very tall trees. We have about 15 minutes left on the hour, but it sounds like we are coming to a natural close in the conversation. So I try to make these between 30 minutes and an hour. So I usually cut us off as an hour, but as long as we get past 30 minutes on a discussion, that is my goal. Is there anything else that somebody wanted to bring up before we end the call for the night?
So we see that Taylor Swift, that this album was #1. What is because I tend to think of them at the same time, just because they seem to be the reigning female, I'm not going to use genre, I'm just going to say music artists, along with Beyonce. But it seems like Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish have you have one of those charts, and they kind of meet at some point. There are certain things that are similar about them, particularly in terms of how their stories come from themselves. Even when they're talking about other characters, they seem to. Why was Billie Eilish's record not #1, or why is Taylor Swift the phenomenon she is, and Billie Eilish, while popular, is nowhere near the level that the worldwide superstar that Taylor Swift is?
I have a couple of answers for that. One is that they actually release albums on separate years, so they don't release albums on the same year. So
Right.
they wouldn't be compared on the charts.
Okay.
I don't know if that is like by design, but it's just something that I've noticed is Taylor Swift releases every 2 years and Billie Eilish tends to release on the opposing 2 years. They actually both released an album in 2024, so you can finally pit them against each other. But I think a lot of it has to do with, one, Billie Eilish is new on the scene. And I think Taylor Swift does bigger shows. I think Taylor Swift is more of a live phenomenon that is more on par with like K-pop stars than Billie Eilish, who doesn't tend to do performances. Or Sabrina Carpenter also does like very, very big live performances. I would view them as like their live performances are just that. They are live performances, whereas Billie Eilish does more concerts. And I think that is a huge distinction between the two. That being said, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go was only one on a few lists. And I don't know what else came out this year that I want to know what #1 was on Billie Eilish's year.
What you said about putting on a show, that explains how Taylor Swift and Beyonce are kind of in that same universe of popularity, whereas Billie Eilish seems to be interested more in doing more intimate kind of shows than the two of them. So Taylor Swift and Beyonce seem to be the two biggest musical artists in the world right now, and that seems to be the commonality between the two of them.
I think there is a huge difference between being a phenomenal musician and being a pop star. I think those are two very distinct things. And yeah, I think I would put Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Ariana Grande, a few Sabrina Carpenter as well in like the performance category, that I would probably also view them, like I said, on par with like K-pop groups. It's like a performance, pandering towards an audience sort of thing, which is a different art form than like what Billie Eilish and Phineas are doing.
Yeah.
So I think that would be more my comparison, which is why I think this album is so interesting for Taylor Swift, is because this is a very music-focused album. None of these are, even the songs that are singles, don't feel like they should be singles. This is completely opposite of what she usually does.
Yeah, this isn't the type of stuff that you would get all glitzed up and have backup dancers and, running around a stage.
Yeah.
I think that's another reason I think of Eilish here, because this is a very intimate sounding album in the same way that pretty much everything that Billie Eilish seems to do has that kind of intimacy. And my sense is that Taylor Swift's other albums are not this intimate sounding.
I think that since this album, they have gotten more intimate sounding. I think that this opened a door for her a little bit so that she was able to explore different parts of her creativity as opposed to what she was doing before, which seems like it's a very corporate model. So yeah, I think that's why this album is so interesting to me.
Fair.
This is a musician being a musician as opposed to a musician making music for the masses, making pop songs.
Yeah.
Making music for the man, for the company.
See, now I need to go and explore some of her other albums and just get a sense of what those are.
I think you should absolutely, if you decide to go down this road, try to listen to them in like their discography, just because it is a person growing out of being like a teenager, finding their own spot in like the pop like industry, becoming a pop star, and then breaking out of being a pop star. Like it is like a full roller coaster ride.
But she's so fucking prolific. My God, it would be, the way what Beckett was talking about. It would just like, does any reasonable human being really want to go to through that entire oeuvre?
I mean, if you're looking to go on a musical journey, I suppose.
I think when I said that, I realized that I think another reason why Taylor Swift is such a big phenomenon is because she has gone through these eras, but she doesn't lose fans when she moves to the next one. She just picks up more.
Sure.
And so every single time she's just picking up more fans.
Yeah.
And not losing them quite as fast.
Yeah, this album, I mean, interesting that she called it Folklore. It definitely reminds me more of like a folk album than any like pop or anything like that.
It's got some cottagecore vibes. Any final thoughts for the evening before I end the screen? Well, on that note then, I would highly suggest checking out this album. Folklore as well as Evermore kind of are in the same vein of just like it's very minimalist sounding, very clearly just her writing, but I think she's absolutely somebody that you should check out and read up on. Read the Wikipedia page for Folklore because there is a lot of information there just about how this album came about and the story behind every single song on it. And when you do and you have more thoughts on the matter, let me know. Let me know your thoughts.
I think one thing I'll say is that it definitely, hearing now kind of what the concept of the album is, I would like to go and revisit it and see how it all kind of lines up and flows together.
It's definitely an album to listen to the lyrics. If you do a re-listen of it, like I said, there's 3 songs on it that are technically all the same story from 3 different points of view, and I didn't know that until I read about it. So I think it's absolutely worth re-listening to, like read about it and then re-listen to it with that like context. But on that note, I'm going to end the stream for the night. So thank you both for joining me. And I hope to talk to you all about some media in the future.
Yeah. And thanks for watching.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.